A devoted elderly butler who had served a prominent billionaire family for many years was abruptly charged with taking a precious gemstone. He was hauled into the courtroom without legal representation, shamed before the public eye, and abandoned to confront the might of the affluent all by himself. The general consensus was that he was at fault, as the statements from the elite held greater sway than his pleas and his honesty. However, right in the midst of the proceedings, when it appeared no rescue was possible, something unforeseen occurred. The billionaire's own youthful son, who regarded him as a surrogate father figure, escaped from his caregiver, dashed into the courtroom, and disclosed a startling revelation that altered the whole proceedings permanently. Before we proceed with this tale, remember to hit the subscribe button on the channel and give the video a thumbs up. Oh, and be sure to leave a comment down below, letting us know your location while viewing. We enjoy hearing that. Albert had been employed by the Kensington family for numerous years. Each day he tidied the expansive chambers of their estate, maintained the furnishings, prepared dishes, and consistently ensured all aspects were impeccable. He was reserved, courteous, and profoundly relied upon by all in the residence. Through the years, he formed a strong bond with young Oliver, the small son of Victor Kensington. Oliver adored Albert immensely and viewed him as a second father. Victor Kensington, Oliver's dad, was a stern individual who had lost his spouse several years prior. He had been brought up by his mother Eleanor, a harsh and rigid woman who enjoyed dominating every situation. Eleanor had never approved of Albert, although she never expressed it directly. One day, a treasured family gemstone abruptly vanished. It had belonged to the family across generations, and Eleanor promptly pointed the finger at Albert. She claimed Albert was the sole outsider in the home, and it must have been him. Albert was stunned and bewildered by the claim. Eleanor didn't bother waiting for a proper inquiry. She immediately approached Victor and insisted that Albert had to be the one who took the gemstone. She highlighted that Albert was from a modest background and likely required funds. Victor, though uncertain, deferred to his mother's opinion. She had always been resolute and convincing. Albert attempted to clarify that he would never commit such an act, implored them to search for the gemstone once more. Perhaps it had been misplaced by someone, but Eleanor refused to listen. Victor gazed at Albert and, even lacking solid evidence, yielded to his mother's insistence. He informed Albert that he needed to depart from the estate. Albert felt devastated. After all he had contributed to that family, they assumed he was a criminal. The authorities were summoned. Albert was transported to the nearby police headquarters. The local residents observed as he was led away in distress. He felt degraded and deceived. His only wrongdoing had been serving faithfully for a family that had ceased to believe in him. At the headquarters, Albert remained quiet as officials posed questions to him. They didn't detain him, but they handled him as though he were a prime suspect. Albert lacked an attorney, funds, or anyone to advocate for him. His existence was crumbling. He was permitted to return to his residence, but he was informed he would need to show up in court shortly. The information circulated rapidly, and individuals in the vicinity started murmuring secretly about him. His reputation was now associated with larceny, despite the fact that he had never taken a thing in his entire life. Albert went back to his modest dwelling and wept for hours. He reflected on how his entire existence had transformed in just one day. The most painful aspect wasn't the court notice, or even the societal disgrace. It was the loss of Oliver. He longed for his grin, his inquiries, his embraces. He had looked after him as if he were his own offspring. Now he was uncertain if he would ever encounter him again. In the subsequent days, Albert got a notification from the court. He was being officially charged with pilfering the gemstone and had to gear up for the hearing. Albert had never set foot in a courtroom previously. He was unfamiliar with the judicial process. He didn't possess the resources for an attorney and felt utterly adrift. He attempted to reach out to some acquaintances, but nobody wished to participate. They feared the Kensington family. They were wealthy, dominant, and impactful. Albert felt insignificant and helpless. He strolled along the roads with his gaze lowered, scared to confront anyone. During the nights, he was unable to rest. He repeatedly reviewed every detail in his thoughts. The gemstone, the allegation, the indifference in Victor's gaze, the quietness of those surrounding him. Each instant felt like a burden on his spirit. He couldn't fathom that after so many years of dedication, he was being abandoned to battle solo, without any assistance or backing. In spite of all the anguish and bewilderment, Albert encountered one minor glimmer of optimism. Several days following the allegation, he heard a tap at his entrance. It was Oliver. He had fled from the estate and arrived to visit him, embraced him firmly and began to sob. He stated he didn't accept what his grandmother claimed. He informed Albert he longed for him and that the residence wasn't identical without him. Albert wept as well. He hadn't anticipated seeing him again. Oliver presented him with a little sketch he had created, depicted him grasping Albert's hand. That instant provided Albert with fortitude. Even though he had forfeited his position, his place in the estate, and his honor, he had not lost Oliver's affection. He was too youthful to assist him with attorneys or finances. But his visit reminded him that not everybody had abandoned him. It granted him the bravery to persist. The date of the hearing was nearing, and Albert realized he had to discover a method to protect himself. He started assembling whatever he could that might aid. Vintage photographs, endorsement letters, accounts from individuals he had served prior to the Kensingtons. He went to a legal assistance facility in the town, hoping somebody might aid him without charge. There he encountered a youthful trainee who vowed to do whatever possible, even if he wasn't highly seasoned. Albert supplied him with all the details he possessed. They reviewed the occurrences of the day. The gemstone vanished. He recalled everything: where he had been, what hour he organized which area, and who else had been present in the residence. It wasn't extensive, but it was a start. Albert didn't know if it would suffice, but he was resolved to convey the facts. He was going to confront the Kensingtons in court, not as a servant, but as a man who declined to be overwhelmed by unfairness. While Albert was still attempting to comprehend how he had landed in such a dreadful predicament, the Kensington family was already preparing to secure victory in the matter. Albert had no attorney, no resources, and no knowledge of navigating a courtroom. He was frightened, but endeavored to remain resilient. On the opposing side, Eleanor Kensington didn't delay. She directly contacted her personal attorney and engaged the top one in the area. His name was Attorney Elias Thorne, and he was renowned for never failing in cases concerning affluent households. Eleanor instructed him to ensure Albert would be perceived as culpable before all. She desired the hearing to be beyond a mere legal affair. She wanted it to be open and theatrical. Soon, periodicals began issuing titles branding Albert a criminal. Online news platforms and broadcast programs echoed the identical narrative: Butler pilfers from Kensington's. Albert observed his reputation being ruined publicly before the hearing even commenced. It seemed unjust. Victor Kensington observed how swiftly everything was progressing. He noticed how his mother was managing the situation. Although he didn't concur with all her choices, he remained silent. Deep within, he felt uneasy. He recalled how Albert used to look after Oliver, how he always showed up early, labored diligently, and never once provided them any cause to question him. But simultaneously, he relied on his mother. She had nurtured him single-handedly and always advised him on what was optimal for the family. He was unsure what to trust. Victor attempted to evade the press spotlight and concentrated on his profession, but the remorse lingered in his thoughts. Each time he walked by Albert's former quarters, he recollected him. He didn't mention anything to the attorney, and he didn't attempt to halt the press assaults. He was trapped between two perspectives, one brimming with regard for his mother, and another saturated with remorse regarding Albert. Still, he opted for quietness. Oliver sensed that something was amiss in the residence. Albert wasn't present anymore, and nobody clarified matters to him adequately. He was merely a youngster, but he comprehended that individuals were sorrowful and furious. He inquired of his father multiple times where Albert was, but Victor never provided a straightforward response. Eleanor instructed Oliver not to fret, stating Albert had committed something wrong and wouldn't return. Oliver didn't accept it. He remembered how Albert used to recite tales to him, assist with his schoolwork, and prepare his preferred treats. He yearned for his bedtime narratives and his gentle grin. Nothing seemed identical without him. The replacement personnel didn't understand how to care for him as he did. One evening, Oliver created a drawing of him and Albert, similar to the one he had given him earlier, and he concealed it in his compartment. Deep inside, he wished that someday he would return and circumstances would revert to how they were previously. While the Kensington family geared up for a straightforward triumph, the actual probe appeared to be disregarded. Albert attempted to collect anything that might assist in demonstrating his blamelessness. He requested a neighbor to accompany him back to the residence to examine something. He recalled that there were surveillance devices near the chamber where the gemstone was stored. But when he inquired about the recordings, nobody provided a direct reply. Eventually, he discovered something odd. The device that captured the chamber had been deactivated precisely when the gemstone disappeared. That fact appeared significant, but no one showed interest in it. Albert informed a court representative about it, but he stated it wasn't pertinent without proof of who deactivated it. Albert didn't know how to debate. He wasn't an attorney. He had no notion who could assist him in exploring this further. That finding made him more perplexed. Why would a surveillance device be inactive during a theft? Eleanor didn't permit anything to impede her. She advocated for the hearing date to be advanced, desiring everything to occur swiftly. Her attorney adhered to her directives flawlessly. He assembled declarations to illustrate how dependable the Kensington family was and how dubious Albert had always seemed, even without proof. Eleanor conversed with reporters and offered subtle, unofficial remarks that implied Albert had done this previously. Certain publications spread gossip that Albert had financial issues or a concealed obligation, which wasn't accurate. Albert witnessed his persona being demolished increasingly each day. The individuals who once acknowledged him on the road now averted their gazes. Even some previous companions ceased responding to his communications. Albert felt like the world had opposed him, and he hadn't even had the opportunity to express himself. He continually reassured himself he was innocent. But with all that was transpiring, it appeared as though nobody desired to hear. The framework had already decided before he could protect himself. As the hearing day drew near, Albert felt an immense burden on his shoulders. He scarcely rested at night. The periodicals still labeled him a wrongdoer. His court-designated advocate hardly communicated with him, and when he did, he behaved as if his matter was merely another document on his workstation. Meanwhile, Eleanor ensured the courtroom would be packed with journalists and prominent figures. She wanted the audience to witness that nobody takes from the Kensington family and escapes unscathed. Victor still didn't utter a word. He observed everything unfold and convinced himself it was too late to intervene now. Oliver remained silent as well, but he still contemplated Albert every evening. On the surface, it appeared as though the Kensingtons had already succeeded. But within Albert, something remained vibrant, the urge to establish the facts. Even with the probabilities against him, he resolved he would resist. He arose on the morning of the hearing with apprehension in his core, but prepared to confront it all. Albert reached the courthouse early that morning. He donned his old service attire, the identical one he wore daily when he served at the Kensington estate. It was all he owned, didn't have the means to purchase elegant garments or afford a suitable attorney. His hands trembled, but he maintained his posture erect. Inside the courtroom, individuals whispered as he passed by. Some regarded him with compassion, others with criticism. He sat by himself, clutching a small satchel with a few papers. His eyes were weary, but he resisted the tears. He didn't want to weep before everyone. The judge entered, and the proceedings started. On the opposite side of the space, the prosecutor arose. He had been engaged by Eleanor Kensington and was set to execute her strategy. He described Albert as an opportunist, someone who became too at ease within a wealthy home and believed he could seize what was his. Listened without speaking. As the prosecutor persisted, he depicted Albert as someone who had exploited the Kensingtons' faith, stated he had utilized his role in the home to pilfer something precious. He employed terms like unappreciative, scheming, and false devotion. The courtroom was hushed as he spoke. People were attending closely, and many nodded in agreement, as if it all added up. But Albert knew those assertions weren't factual. He had never pilfered anything. Still, without a competent attorney to safeguard him, he had no means to halt the allegations. The prosecutor displayed images of the absent gemstone and outlined its worth. He clarified how Albert had entry to the chamber and made it appear as though only he could have removed it. Then he introduced witnesses, individuals who had previously worked in the estate or knew the family. Most of them stated things that bolstered the Kensingtons' position. Some even altered their statements slightly to align with what the prosecutor required. The facts didn't seem vital. Victor sat close to his mother, his arms folded and his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't talk. He didn't even glance at Albert. He possessed recollections of him being compassionate, attentive, and faithful. But he was perplexed. His mother had informed him that fairness needed to be served, that Albert had deceived them, and now everything was progressing so rapidly, he felt ensnared. If he voiced out, it would oppose Eleanor, and he lacked the resolve to do that, so he remained mute. Each time Albert looked in his direction, hoping to detect something in his eyes, perhaps remorse or encouragement, Victor averted his gaze. He was evidently uncomfortable, but he maintained his separation. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat next to him with assurance. She murmured remarks to her attorney, grinned when matters favored her, and behaved as if the result was already determined. To her, this hearing was more about authority and dominance than uncovering the actual facts. Albert's perspective didn't appear to count. In the rear of the courtroom, Oliver sat with his caregiver. He wasn't meant to be there, but he demanded to attend. Nobody truly observed him initially. He watched the grown-ups converse, debate, and accuse. He didn't grasp everything, but he grasped sufficient. Albert, the individual who once clasped his hand when he was frightened, was now positioned in the center of all this. Oliver didn't believe he had done anything improper. He recalled how he always aided others and never requested anything, but nobody inquired about his opinion. He had to sit quietly observing the people he cherished conflict in a manner he didn't comprehend. Yet the courtroom felt chilly to him. Everyone appeared grave. Even his father didn't grin. Oliver kept his eyes on Albert the entire time. Didn't utter a word, but inside he wished he could dash up and embrace him. Didn't want him to feel isolated. But youngsters don't get to speak in court. Outside the courtroom, the press was awaiting. News recorders were omnipresent, and journalists yelled inquiries to anyone connected. Headlines had already marked Albert as culpable. Butler pilfers from billionaire family in Kensington's. Deceived by servant were inscribed in prominent letters across online sites and periodicals. Nobody awaited the judgment. The narrative had already been narrated, and Albert was the antagonist. Individuals online shared furious remarks about him. Some labeled him avaricious. Others claimed he orchestrated the entire scheme from the outset. Albert didn't even have a method to safeguard himself. His image was on the broadcasts. His name was popular. His existence was being dismantled before the whole nation. He felt like he had no expression, wasn't celebrated, affluent, or dominant. All he possessed was his honesty, and nobody desired to hear it. Still, he maintained his composure. He reminded himself of his principles, of his late father's guidance, and clung to whatever resilience he had remaining. When it was Albert's opportunity to express himself, the courtroom became hushed once more. He rose gradually and proceeded to the witness area. His hands were chilly, but he didn't tremble. He inhaled deeply and regarded the judge. Then he looked directly forward and spoke distinctly. He stated he never handled anything that wasn't his, clarified how he had served in that residence for years, offering his utmost every day. He said he had cherished Oliver like his own child and never envisioned harming the family. His voice faltered once, but he didn't weep. He spoke sincerely. He said he knew people had already formed opinions, but he had to declare the truth regardless. As he spoke, most individuals didn't respond. Some appeared uninterested, others doubtful. It was as if his words had no significance. Nobody applauded. Nobody displayed support. When he concluded, he sat down again by himself, as if nothing he expressed mattered whatsoever. As the hearing progressed, minor discrepancies began to emerge in the matter. During the initial days, everything appeared to proceed precisely as Eleanor Kensington had orchestrated. But gradually, some particulars started to become noticeable. A few individuals near the Kensington family were abruptly unavailable or reluctant to speak. The veteran housekeeper, who had served at the estate even longer than Albert, was inexplicably dismissed from her role. Nobody clarified why. When Albert's court-designated assistant attempted to contact her for a declaration, the woman declined to remark. Then one of the junior servants quietly informed someone that she had observed Eleanor entering the gemstone chamber late at night, just prior to the gemstone vanishing. But the servant rapidly withdrew, stating she was scared of losing her position. Fear was pervasive. The more Albert heard these fragments of truth, the more perplexed he felt. He knew something didn't align, but without backing, he had no way to investigate further or substantiate any of it. Inside the estate, matters weren't as serene as they appeared. Oliver had been observing closely what was occurring. Although he was still quite young, he noticed the abrupt shift in how adults conducted themselves around him. People whispered more, evaded certain subjects, and switched topics when he posed questions. Oliver began recollecting something that had transpired the night the gemstone vanished. He had seen someone moving near the gemstone chamber when he arose to fetch water. But when he told his grandmother what he observed the following morning, she informed him it was merely a dream and not to reference it again. At the time, he trusted her. But now, after witnessing Albert in court and hearing how he was being treated, he wasn't so certain anymore. Oliver tried to discuss with his father, Victor, about what he recalled. He waited for the appropriate moment and finally approached him. But Victor seemed preoccupied and didn't attend. Oliver felt unseen. Eleanor began observing that Oliver was behaving differently, posed more questions, and didn't seem engaged in the playthings she purchased for him. At first, she disregarded it, but soon she understood he was pondering too much about Albert and the hearing. She resolved to respond promptly. She instructed Oliver not to concern himself with adult issues, and began indulging him with fresh electronic games, sweets, and a pledged outing to the theme park. She embraced him more frequently and told him how unique he was. But behind all the fondness, Eleanor was attempting to maintain dominance. She dreaded that if Oliver expressed himself, someone might begin posing questions, so she kept him near and occupied. When Oliver mentioned again that he recalled something from the night of the pilfering, Eleanor grinned and told him she trusted him, but that it was better not to say anything. She said people might become confused and blame him. Frightened, Oliver ceased inquiring and kept his thoughts private. Albert, conversely, was depleting his hope. The hearing wasn't progressing favorably, and his court-designated advocate barely communicated with him. Every day he attended court feeling diminished, as if nothing he expressed counted. He still wore his old attire because it was the only formal clothing he possessed. People stared at him like he was already culpable. One afternoon, as he returned home, exhausted and emotionally depleted, he heard a knock at his door. A young woman stood there holding a folder. She introduced herself as Sophia, a new attorney just beginning her career. Sophia had been following Albert's case in the news and felt something wasn't correct. She said she didn't have much experience, but she believed Albert was conveying the truth. Albert was astonished. Nobody had believed him in weeks. Sophia asked if she could represent him officially. Albert hesitated initially, but quickly consented. He had nothing remaining to forfeit, and needed anyone, who was willing to assist. Sophia began examining everything she could about the case. She stayed up late reading the court records, viewing the news coverage, and noting down every detail Albert shared. She noticed how many declarations seemed inconsistent. She also found it peculiar that nobody had questioned why the primary surveillance device in the gemstone chamber was deactivated that night. Albert told her about the servant who mentioned seeing Eleanor, but they didn't know how to locate her. Sophia took notes, created a list of people to converse with, and promised Albert she would exert her utmost. She went to the courthouse to submit the paperwork to officially replace Albert's previous advocate. The judge consented, even cautioning Sophia that this case was complex and hazardous. Sophia didn't retreat. She knew she was inexperienced, but she believed in fairness and in providing people a platform. Albert felt for the first time in weeks that he was not isolated. Sophia's presence gave him a small but potent hope. While Albert and Sophia worked discreetly to prepare for the next phases, the Kensington estate remained filled with concealed matters. Some of the personnel were evidently anxious. A few servants avoided eye contact. Some ceased speaking to each other completely. Eleanor acted as if nothing was amiss, managing everything with a grin. Victor, meanwhile, stayed quiet and aloof, still uncertain of what to believe. Oliver kept pondering the night he saw someone traversing the corridor. He knew what he witnessed. He didn't know how to articulate it, but he wanted to aid Albert. Time he saw him in court, his heart felt burdened, but his grandmother's cautions kept echoing in his mind. He didn't want to create trouble or anger people, so he remained silent. Eleanor continued to observe everyone attentively, especially Oliver. She provided him more presents and said pleasant things, but it was evident she was concealing something. The truth was near but still secured within the estate. Sophia initiated her probe with caution and endurance. She visited the courthouse records and requested every document linked to the Kensington estate and the alleged pilfering. As she perused the accounts, she noticed minor errors that didn't add up. Timings didn't correspond, Annotations from officials were unfinished, and the entry about the malfunctioning device seemed too ambiguous. It appeared as if someone wanted to obscure more than they disclosed. Sophia compared the data with Albert's declarations, and things didn't match. Albert had always been explicit about where he was that night, but the accounts overlooked some of his words. Sophia returned to Albert and posed more questions, recording everything in her notebook. The more she discovered, the more she realized this case was not about a basic theft. Something more profound was being concealed. She decided she needed to visit the estate itself to inspect and perhaps uncover answers that were absent from the official documents. While Sophia was occupied with her probe, Oliver continued to feel uneasy.
Got questions that nobody seemed inclined to address.
One afternoon, while Eleanor sat in the sitting area perusing, Oliver mustered bravery and inquired again about the night the gemstone vanished. He said he recalled something and wanted to know if Albert was truly culpable. Eleanor lowered her book, stared at him icily, and told him to cease inquiring. She said adults had resolved the issue and children should not interfere. Oliver didn't retreat. He inquired again why she was near the gemstone chamber that night. Eleanor's expression stiffened. She warned him that if he persisted, she would dispatch him to a distant boarding institution. Oliver froze. The idea of departing from his father horrified him. Eleanor leaned nearer and reiterated her caution. Oliver remained quiet after that, but the fear within him intensified. He knew his grandmother was hiding something, but he also knew she was perilous. Victor, meanwhile, was under increasing strain. The press kept posing questions about the case, and individuals outside the family began to murmur that the Kensingtons were concealing particulars. The hearing was turning into a show, and Victor couldn't avoid the scrutiny. One night, he sat alone in his workspace and accessed old videos stored on his device. He wasn't searching for evidence about the gemstone. He wanted to recall happier periods. As he browsed through the files, he discovered a recording of Albert with Oliver, taken soon after his wife's passing. In the video, Albert was seated with the boy in his chamber, consoling him while he wept. He told him he was cherished and secure, holding him until he settled. Viewing the scene, Victor felt something alter within him. He realized Albert had been more than a worker. He had been kin. For the first time, he doubted his mother's assurance. Perhaps Albert wasn't culpable. Perhaps he had been mistaken. Sophia's search guided her to a vital finding. She succeeded in speaking with someone who had participated in a charity gathering a few days after the night the gemstone supposedly vanished. That individual told her they saw Eleanor Kensington wearing the exact same gemstone at the gathering. Sophia was astonished. If the gemstone had been around Eleanor's neck at the event, then it was never taken to begin with. She promptly searched for photos or news pieces from the event, and for a brief period, she located one image online displaying Eleanor in a somber gown with the gemstone gleaming around her neck. Thrilled, she preserved it and prepared to incorporate it into Albert's defense. But the following day, when she verified again, the photo was absent. The site had eliminated it, and the origin declined to converse. It was as if the proof had been wiped out overnight. Sophia realized that Eleanor's reach extended far beyond the courtroom. She had authority to make things vanish. The loss of the proof irritated Sophia, but it didn't deter her. She returned to Albert with the account and explained what she had uncovered. Albert wasn't surprised. He always suspected Eleanor had more involvement in the case than anyone acknowledged. Hearing that the gemstone had been observed publicly only made him more convinced. Sophia promised to continue searching, even if the image was gone. She proposed they attempt to contact other attendees who were at the event. Perhaps someone else had noticed the gemstone. Albert concurred, even though he felt the barriers closing around him. Each day in court was tougher, and the allegations grew more intense. He had almost no supporters except for Sophia and his recollections of Oliver. Albert thought about him frequently, hoping he still trusted in him. For Sophia, the absent proof was not a conclusion, but an indication. Evidence that Eleanor was desperate to keep the facts concealed, which meant they were approaching nearer. Inside the Kensington household, Eleanor began to sense the strain as well. She could detect Victor's silence was not the same as before, and Oliver's conduct made her uncomfortable. She knew Sophia was delving into the case, and even if the young attorney was inexperienced, she feared tenacity could yield outcomes. Eleanor convinced herself she had to respond before matters spiraled out of control. She strengthened her grip over the personnel, cautioning them not to converse with anyone external. She kept Oliver occupied with presents and diversions, though his eyes revealed his uncertainties. With Victor, she employed remorse, reminding him of family prestige and duty. Eleanor's resolve intensified. She had constructed her life on authority and status, and she would not permit a servant to ruin it. But for the first time, fractures were appearing. People were posing questions, and secrets were harder to manage. Eleanor realized that the net was tightening. If she wanted to safeguard herself, she would need to undertake extreme measures. On the third day of the hearing, the environment inside the courtroom was charged. The judge occupied his seat. The attorneys readied their notes, and Albert tried to stay composed, even though he felt shattered internally. Sophia whispered words of motivation, telling him to remain steadfast. The Kensington family took their customary places, with Eleanor appearing assured as ever. Victor sat quietly, his demeanor inscrutable. The hearing was advancing like the prior days, with the prosecution persisting in assaulting Albert's character. Abruptly, the substantial doors of the courtroom swung open, and Oliver slipped inside. Having eluded the caregiver who was supposed to supervise him, people turned in astonishment as the boy rushed directly to Albert. Without pause, he encircled his arms around his waist, clutching him firmly as if to shield him. Then, in a resounding voice, he pressed his small hand over his mouth and said, "Esh, I know who did this, Daddy." The whole courtroom stiffened in astonishment. The abrupt declaration generated disorder in the space. Journalists lifted their cameras, people muttered, and the judge demanded order. Albert stiffened, holding Oliver near, uncertain of what was transpiring. Eleanor's face grew ashen, and Victor promptly stood. The judge requested the boy to be escorted out, but Victor interjected. He advanced, his voice quivering as he stated that Oliver should be permitted to express himself. He clarified that his son had been silent for weeks, harboring something within, and now he needed to be heard. After a brief pause, the judge consented. Oliver looked around anxiously, then at Albert before speaking again. His tiny voice permeated the quietness of the courtroom. He said that one night after awakening for water, he saw his grandmother Eleanor in the office. He saw her grasping something glittering and concealing it inside a container. He also overheard her murmur to herself that Albert would be an easy mark. His words caused everyone in the room to fall silent once more. The prosecutor swiftly attempted to regain command of the situation. He arose and contended that Oliver was merely a child, too young to comprehend what he witnessed or heard. He said youngsters often mix up dreams with actuality, and reminded the court that recollections could be undependable. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, attempting to recover her poise, but her fingers drummed nervously against her armrest. Oliver, however, did not yield, maintained he was conveying the truth. He described the container where Eleanor had concealed the gemstone, a dark wooden container with a golden latch stored inside her office desk. He also reiterated the precise words she had uttered. Albert will be an easy mark. The specifics were too exact to disregard. People in the courtroom traded glances, whispering to one another. Even the judge furrowed his brow, realizing that Oliver's account could not be rejected so readily. Particularly due to the accuracy of his narrative. Albert stood motionless, his heart pounding. Couldn't believe Oliver had voiced out before everyone. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from alleviation. For the first time since the ordeal started, someone had declared the truth aloud, and it originated from the person he cherished most in the world. Sophia immediately responded, standing to her feet and informing the judge that Oliver's declaration was essential and must be examined. She highlighted that the boy had no motive to fabricate, and that his details aligned with the discrepancies already identified in the case. The judge consented to halt the session and directed an examination into Oliver's account. Victor, standing nearby, appeared divided between astonishment and remorse. He finally ventured to meet Albert's eyes, and what he saw there caused him to bow his head in disgrace. He realized how oblivious he had been to the truth, and how much Albert had endured unjustly, who until then had dominated every aspect of the process, displayed her initial indications of vulnerability. She attempted to remain composed, but her lips quivered slightly as she whispered something to her attorney. Her assured expression was absent, substituted by discomfort. For years, she had orchestrated situations, muted voices, and molded reality to suit her wishes. But now, her own grandson had spoken against her and she couldn't halt him. Journalists jotted notes rapidly, some already crafting headlines about the astonishing development. Reporters murmured that the flawless Kensington image was disintegrating. Victor sat motionless, visibly agitated, while Oliver leaned against Albert, clasping his hand firmly. Eleanor finally elevated her voice, saying, Oliver was confused and influenced by Albert, but her words lacked their customary strength. Everyone could see her poise fracturing. The facade she had worn so meticulously was beginning to unravel, and for the first time, people questioned her involvement in the case. The judge declared that the hearing would be temporarily paused. He said Oliver's account raised grave questions that needed to be probed before advancing. Officials were directed to inspect the office and the estate and search for the wooden container Oliver described. Sophia smiled subtly at Albert, whispering that this was their opportunity. Albert, though inundated, felt a surge of optimism. For weeks, nobody had trusted him. And now the truth had finally started to emerge through Oliver's bravery. Eleanor sat in silence, her form rigid, her hands gripped together. She knew the net was tightening. Victor placed a protective arm around his son, still unable to digest everything he had heard. The courtroom cleared gradually, filled with strain and murmurs of transformation. For the first time, Albert exited not as a vanquished man, but as someone who might still possess a future. And beside him, Sophia knew the struggle had only just commenced. With the probe now active, the Kensington estate felt altered. Tension increased in every nook of the house, and for the first time, Victor decided he could no longer remain mute. He waited until Oliver was asleep, and then proceeded to his mother's office. Eleanor was seated behind her large desk, feigning to read, but she knew why he was there. Victor shut the door and demanded the facts. His voice was steady, louder than he had ever addressed her before. He asked why Oliver had depicted her actions so vividly. Why the container, the boy referenced, matched details no child could fabricate. Eleanor regarded him with piercing eyes, but she realized her hold over him was waning. Victor pressed once more, telling her he could not persist in defending her if she didn't clarify. The atmosphere between them was dense. And finally, Eleanor arose. She began to speak, her voice steady, but laced with resentment, ready to admit her motives. The discussion rapidly escalated into a fervent dispute. Victor charged his mother with ruining Albert's life without genuine proof. Eleanor responded by saying Albert had been becoming too close to Oliver, occupying a role that wasn't his. She said Oliver viewed Albert as a father, and even Victor regarded him differently, almost as if he was supplanting his late wife. Eleanor's manner was cold, but passionate. She confessed she felt endangered. She feared Albert would seize control of the family, and she couldn't permit that. Eleanor clarified that she never meant to inflict so much harm. Her initial scheme was only to frighten Albert, to remind him of his position. But matters intensified when Theghamstone vanished. Once the doubt fell on Albert, she allowed the deception to proceed, thinking it would safeguard her family's heritage. Victor listened in quietness, shattered. He realized how much his mother's apprehension had blinded them all, and how his quietness had made him complicit in the unfairness. Victor departed the office in astonishment. For years he had trusted his mother utterly, but now he felt betrayed. He recollected every instance Albert had demonstrated kindness, and how he disregarded it under a lamp. He proceeded to Oliver's chamber and sat beside his sleeping son. He contemplated how Oliver had been more courageous than him in voicing the truth when adults remained silent. That night, Victor made a choice. He returned to Eleanor's office, not to debate, but to investigate. He opened compartments, shifted volumes, and finally uncovered a small vault concealed behind a cupboard. After multiple tries, he succeeded in opening it with a key he discovered in Eleanor's desk. Inside, he viewed the missing gemstone carefully enveloped in fabric. But that wasn't everything. The vault also held envelopes with currency, papers, and other objects that didn't appear to belong there. Victor stared at the contents, realizing this was the evidence that could finally alter everything. The next morning, Victor didn't waver. He transported the vault to the police headquarters and delivered it. The officials were surprised, but they promptly began noting and documenting the proof. Victor clarified where he had located it and how it verified Oliver's account. He admitted that his mother had been concealing the gemstone and possibly other valuables. The police expressed gratitude and promised to incorporate the finding in the probe. Victor felt a combination of relief and remorse. He had done the correct thing now, but it arrived too late to reverse the harm Albert had already endured. Outside the headquarters, reporters were waiting and news disseminated rapidly. Headlines transformed overnight. Instead of labeling Albert a criminal, the media began to concentrate on Eleanor Kensington's Sinventant. The public, who had been so hasty to condemn Albert, started questioning the family's authority and secrets. For the first time, Albert's name appeared alongside terms like blamelessness and unfairness. This time, circumstances were altered. Sophia presented the discovery of the gemstone and clarified that it had been found concealed inside Eleanor's office vault. She also indicated the other suspicious objects, suggesting there could be more behind the narrative. The judge permitted Albert to speak again, and he narrated his story with more assurance than before. His voice was firm as he reiterated that he had never taken anything. He discussed his years of loyalty, his affection for Oliver, and his respect for the Kensington household. The courtroom attended closely, and this time, people didn't dismiss his words. Reporters recorded every detail. Cameras concentrated on his face, and even members of the public who had once believed he was guilty now began to feel compassion. Sophia's argument strengthened, bolstered by the tangible proof. The entire matter shifted, and Albert was no longer viewed as the accused, but as a victim of a dominant family's deceptions. Eleanor was compelled to sit in the courtroom and observe the truth reveal itself. For the first time, her dominance was absent. She didn't speak, her eyes fixed on the floor as the prosecution attempted to recuperate, but failed. Victor sat on the other side, holding Oliver close, finally liberating himself from his mother's sway. Hefeld ashamed for not shielding Albert sooner, but he was determined to back him now. Oliver, though still a youngster, felt proud that his voice had made an impact. Albert, standing erect, looked at them both with mixed feelings. He had endured humiliation, agony, and fear, but at that instant he saw a route toward fairness. The people who once abandoned him were beginning to perceive the truth. The burden of deceptions was finally easing. And for the first time, the future didn't seem despairing. The matter was distant from concluded. But Albert finally had evidence on his side, and the world was starting to attend. With the vault proof in Victor's account now part of the matter, the courtroom environment changed entirely. For weeks, Albert had sat in silence, treated like a wrongdoer. But now, the balance was shifting in his favor. Sophia stood before the judge with a meticulously prepared display. She exhibited a chronology of events, commencing with the night the gemstone vanished and concluding with the uncovering of Eleanor's secret vow. Every phase of the narrative disclosed how Eleanor had orchestrated the situation, fabricating a false story that made Albert appear culpable. The prosecution tried to interject, but the judge permitted Sophia to proceed. The proof was too robust to overlook. Albert, sitting beside his attorney, felt his hands quivering, but this time from relief. For the first time in months, he wasn't invisible. His truth was being declared aloud before everyone. He bowed his head and whispered a quiet invocation, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to finally be heard. The judge attended attentively, making notes as Sophia clarified each point. She demonstrated how Albert's access to the gemstone chamber had been overstated, how the deactivated device had been conveniently overlooked, and how witnesses were swayed by Eleanor's authority. Sophia then linked these details with the gemstone being observed at the charity gathering, connecting the elements together. Victor arose and affirmed his portion, admitting his silence had rendered him a participant. His words were weighty but sincere, and the courtroom reacted with murmurs of surprise. Eleanor, sitting in the front row, remained rigid, her lips compressed tightly. She avoided visual contact with everyone, especially Victor and Oliver. The judge finally elevated her hand and proclaimed that the procedure had been defective from the start. She said Albert should never have been maintained under suspicion for so long without appropriate proof. With that, she announced Albert's immediate liberation. The courtroom filled with sound, some inhalations, some cheers as people realized direction had reversed. As soon as the ruling was declared, Oliver escaped from his caregiver's hold and dashed across the space without hesitation.